it's not easy thing to say. It's not an easy pill to swallow, but it's the truth. But as Muslims, we have to keep talking about it and say, look, guys, you might not like it, but if you really want a solution, that's the solution. Okay, and Islam can offer that solution. These are the conversations that we're just not having. And I thought this is the proverbial elephant in the room. It's like, surely this is the most pertinent of all the conversations that we need to have. They only have power because Muslims believe they have power and that they should be obeyed. So the reason why we have corrupt governments is quite literally a problem of Iman, because we believe that we should be obeying governments that don't implement Islam, which now invalidates them as actually leaders and rulers. If we were truly concerned with the truth and we, in a way, eliminated the humans from the equation when we look at when we think about truth, then you'd get to see a better adab and better akhlaq amongst Muslims, even in our debates with each other or our debates with other people, because it will be purely about trying to find the truth.
No, I'm not worried at all. I rely on God, Allah.
On behalf of the Lifehawk team, thank you for watching this video. And for more clips and beneficial content, please subscribe to the Lifehawk channel, your #1 source for personal Islamic development.
I was once invited to do a lecture on the Muslim perspective on the British flag, and by a society that specializes in just looking at different flags and iconography. It was very niche. It was amazing. I mean, it was quite fascinating anyway. As a society, they like flags. The video's up online for those who obviously were interested. And there was actually a minister of parliament that was there, so an MP. And I basically just explained, obviously, the Islamic perspective, which is that we'd find waving of flags quite, in a way, ridiculous, because the flags were invented to be tools to manage armies on battlefields. Why are you waving a flag in your own country? Do you forget which country you're in if you can't see the flag up, which one it is? Do you suffer from short-term memory problems that will need you to remind yourself which country you're in? So I presented it from a kind of wide view, historical, anthropological, and of course Islamic perspective, which I think aligns to all those things. And it wasn't responded to negatively. Actually, they were actually quite interested. It made them think. About, rather than just me coming up as a Muslim saying I'm a UK Muslim and I love the British flag and I love it so much and I wear toppies made of it and clothes made of it, and if I give hijabs made out of the British flag out to sisters for every photo op opportunity done by Western media. So it's that kind of ridiculous kind of thing, which I suppose some Muslims, well, they wouldn't do it like that, but some Muslims, they just come on to say, look, I'm a Muslim, I'm a citizen, and I'm proud to follow everything of this culture. Where it's like, well, look, if you mean by customs, then of course, we follow British customs. We drink our tea, or usually coffee though. We queue up in shops and things like where queues are required, and we do all those things that we speak English. All the things which are customary, we enjoy English literature, all the things which are customary, but the culture, as in the deen, which is predominant, which is secular liberalism in Britain, we don't follow that. And nationalism as an adjunct to that, well, we're not nationalistic. We don't believe that just because you're part of an ethno-linguistic group gives you authority by dint of just being a member of that group. And likewise, we would argue that if you have a problem with racism and you really want to solve racism, you have to get rid of the idea of the nation-state concept and nationalism, because the nation-state concept is the idea that an ethno-linguistic group is represented by a state. And what do you do then with other ethno-linguistic groups which are not from that major ethno-linguistic group? Are they represented by the state? And you might say, well, yeah, in a way we're all equal citizens, but it's a nation state. So which nation really? And that kind of dispute you see in every country. And Canada is a great example, because you have the Francophone Canadians and the Anglophone Canadians, the English speakers and the French speakers, and they don't seem to appreciate the jurisdiction of the other, to put it lightly, right? So, and that's just in Canada, of course, but you can go to other countries around the world where there's civil wars between ethno-linguistic groups as to who defines the nature of the nation, and racism emerges from that. The idea of hating an ethnic group, or viewing them as trouble, or viewing them as trying to supplant or change the culture of the society, i.e. the culture of the way of life of the major ethnic group, or the majority ethnic group, or the ruling ethnic group. This emanates from it. It's not easy thing to say. It's not an easy pill to swallow, but it's the truth. Nation state concept and nationalism is, I think, one of the major causes of racism today, and the major cause of war than anything else. But people don't want to get rid of that, and so they don't want to talk about that. But as Muslims, we have to keep talking about it and say, look, guys, you might not like it, but if you really want a solution, that's the solution. Okay, and Islam can offer that solution, right? And Islam successfully has offered that solution for centuries. Unfortunately, in this day and age, because Muslims are themselves subject to nationalism, because after colonialism we took these ideas, we too are afflicted with racism and with nationalism and tribalism and obviously sectarianism. But anyway, these are the conversations that we should be having. We shouldn't be talking about 73 sects in the idea of different schools of thought somehow, but we should be talking about the kind of approximately 50 or so sects, i.e. nationalities, split nation states, which are firaq, right? They are factions. They are sects. The word sect means a separation, a group of a fact that separates. I argue that each of these sects are segments, and they're different from the Jama'ah of the Muslims. And any Muslim that clings to their particular nationality is in following a sect. It is part of a sect. And we see a hadith by the Rasulullah where he ordered the Sahabas concerning the future that they should always bind behind the Imam of the Muslims, singular, not plural, the Imam of the Muslims and the Jama'ah, the community. And he was asked, what if there is no Imam of the Muslims and there's no more Jama'ah? There's no more Jama'ah of the Muslims. So he said, then he commanded to separate from all the firaq, from all the factions, even if you have to eat the roots of trees. It doesn't mean now we literally have to find a place, go to Antarctica or somewhere where there's no nation state, but it means that we can't fly the flag or hold the flag proudly of any particular nation state, because that we will be part of the firaq. We will be following a firq, and we will be separating ourselves off. And as Muslims, we should be thinking about the real conversation to be had, especially 100 years after the 100-year anniversary of the fall of the Khilafah, is to reconstitute the Jama'ah and reconstitute an Imam over that Jama'ah, because we can't, because the Prophet Muhammad had this hadith says we can't live any other way, right? So that we have to separate from the different factions, even if we have to eat the roots of trees. That's pretty extreme if you think about it. It's extreme, but it would seem to be extreme, but it has to be described that way to highlight just how important it is as Muslims that we can't be politically divided amongst ourselves, and that's where division. And the Quran says, hold the rope of Allah and be not divided amongst yourselves. Hold tight to the rope of Allah and be not divided amongst yourselves. If anyone affirms the borders between Muslims, you are basically affirming you are going against the express command of the Creator of the universe to not be divided amongst ourselves by believing in borders, by believing in these governments which are not applying Islam and have no authority over Muslims. But anyway, that's the conversation that's not being had. That's the conversation that doesn't get as big resonance. But let's have a lecture on the jinn, because clearly that's of great relevance to us. Or the end times. It's like if we have a lecture on the end times will be more pleasant, or won't come. No, it's going to come anyway. Why are you even fretting about it? Muslims thought the end times were imminent even at the time of the Prophet Muhammad. They thought when the Mongols invaded, that was the end times. We keep thinking everything is the end times, and it never turns out to be the end times. It just turns out to be another calamity.
Well, the end time for anyone is when they're going to enter the grave, right? So, what are we doing in preparation for that? Which I think you're speaking about some practical changes we as a community need to implement. In regards to some of your comments on nationalism, it seems that perhaps people change one flag for another, when they've emigrated to these Western countries, right? You've now maybe discarded the flag of another country, and you've now, okay, this is my new cloak that I'm going to put on. And we're almost repeating the mistakes that got us into this position in the first place.
Oh yes, definitely. And this is the problem. I mean, I'll tell everybody the end time you have to be most worried about, because that's the end time that it's. I mean, Allahu Alam, but it would be highly likely that this is the end time you're going to face. And that end time is the end of your life, the end of your time on this earth as an individual. That's your end time, and that's the only end time you need to think about, because whatever the end time that occurs around the world. We don't know. The Prophet Muhammad described the end time as being as close as between these two fingers. But if I remember correctly, the narration. But 1,400 years has passed. Maybe in the history of man, if you take the history of mankind, which could be maybe 1 million years, the closeness of two fingers might be 5,000 years. By comparison to how the duration of time that humans have been on this planet. So it could be in a few thousand years' time when the end times happens, and we just see gradual signs along that time. Some even said the Mongols was a sign of the end times, and that happened quite hundreds and hundreds of years ago. So my point is that Muslims are having pointless discussions on things that they can't even change, which is the end times, and they're not having discussions on things they can change if only they made it more Muslims aware of these things. Because as I mentioned before, we might have corrupt governments, but no, these governments are not ruled by people who are superhuman, who can shoot lasers out their eyes and they can fly around and lift trains and things with their bare hands. They only have power because Muslims believe they have power and that they should be obeyed. So the reason why we have corrupt governments is quite literally a problem of Iman, because we believe that we should be obeying governments that don't implement Islam, which now invalidates them as actually leaders and rulers. And of course, you can't have more than one Imam over the Muslims. You can't have multiple leaders, right? There can only be one Imam over the Muslims. The classical scholars have always said this. And so, who is the Imam and who are the false pretenders? This is the kind of conversation that we need to have, because if all Muslims were made aware of this, you wouldn't need a revolution or any kind of thing to change them, and people would just stop obeying them. Like Abdullah bin Ubay, the king of Yathrib, he was going to be the king of Yathrib. Also, that he became the king of the hypocrites. But people just didn't obey him and stopped obeying him, and there was and he had to become Muslim himself when there was the change of regime in Yathrib. So the Muslim world, the soldiers of the Muslim world are Muslims, and if they are obeying rulers that, or should we say warlords, that don't have authority, it's a problem of Iman. And we need to talk about that. What about also Muslims are fighting each other, killing each other? What about talking about the verse of Quran that says any Muslim, any believer, any Muslim who willfully kills another believer, that, then they're gonna be sent to Jahannam, khaliduna fiha, to dwell therein, usually implying forever. Okay, how come it's not talking about, like people say, oh brother, we have to talk about calling people to Tawheed or calling people to different things because to save them from Jahannam. But okay, what about Muslims killing each other, obeying the orders of these false rulers, and killing other Muslims, and then putting themselves in Jahannam, potentially Khaliduna fiha, if Allah doesn't forgive? Okay, what about that? Yeah, we're not having those kind of conversations, are we? So you have Muslims bombing each other from Yemen and Arabia, Saudi-occupied Arabia, Egyptians, Libyans fighting each other, killing each other. Obviously in Syria too, Muslims killing Muslims, and the only place that benefits is Jahannam having new inhabitants potentially from these Muslims killing each other. So these are the conversations that we're just not having. And I thought this is the proverbial elephant in the room. It's like, surely this is the most pertinent of all the conversations that we need to have.
How much do you think fear is playing a role in this? I remember a few years ago, this is when Gaddafi was still alive, I was having a conversation with somebody who very well educated, high position within the university, head of a department. And this individual was at that sitting in Canada, thousands of miles away from Libya, deathly afraid of Gaddafi. Like, even to utter anything negative about Gaddafi. Like, you could see the fear was ingrained in this individual. And obviously for somebody being born and raised in Canada, like, it's foreign to you. You're kind of like almost taught through like the culture, like you got to rebel, like it's a natural part of growing up is rebellion, So how sympathetic, number one, can we be of the position of many Muslims who have been, essentially having to live, at the tail end of a boot, and how much is fear playing a role, and how can they overcome this fear? Because maybe that's one of the reasons they're not having these conversations, because of that fear. Will be rejected? Is there something that I will lose from the dunya? Whatever.
Well, the thing is that as Muslims, we are very, our level of understanding of, let's say, the world, politics, human society is so shallow that we tend to focus on individuals, on people, and not on ideas and systems. Anyone that gets into power in the system that has been set up and in the beliefs and worldviews that was set up by the colonialists in the Muslim world, anyone who gets to power will act the same way. It's not just bad luck, generally, right? It's not just bad luck. And anyone who tries to act differently, they'll just get deposed pretty quickly. So obviously, like, Mohammed Morsi, well, you could argue Mohammed Morsi didn't even have the power in the first place because the army always retained the power, and the army were controlled by post-colonial secularists, which were instituted in Egypt and generated by an education system that teaches secularism. So it's really because the Muslim ignorance as to onto what Islam says, the Islamic worldview, Islam's address for politics, and Islam's solutions and commandments, the Islamic worldview's understanding of nationalism and how it rejects it, the lack of understanding amongst Muslims on these matters, and the kind of substitution of that for Western or secular ideas of nationalism and secular rule and so on and so forth, means that we'll always have such leaders come to power if the systems don't change. Now, you do get rare oddities that emerge where people do try to change systems. Certainly, if it's in a system that where the power is a bit more distributed. But for example, Imran Khan is a bit different from the standard ruler in Pakistan in the past. Whether he won't be deposed by a coup is a different question, of course. But it might also reflect the fact that the people are just tired of the same corrupt kind of leaders, and also perhaps they influence the army to not do a coup and to let this person to make a change in the system, which is more fundamental. That might reflect the change of the people's perception over time and the gradual kind of elevation of their thinking over time, as they think, well, we can't just have the same kind of people we've had before. And why are these people coming into power? It's because of how we look at politics in the first place. And this perhaps, if I may, brings me to talk about how Muslims even conduct the debate and discussion in the Muslim world, because I think it's part and parcel of the reason why we have the political systems that we do. You see it reflected even on the smallest scale with how Muslims even conduct themselves in light of difference of opinion and disagreement.
Yeah, we have a question from the audience I'd like to run by you. The question states, how do Western school of thoughts manage the contradiction between freedom of conscience, right to change beliefs and creed, and making everyone a citizen without asking for their consent first?
Making everybody a citizen without asking for their consent to be a citizen.
So how do they manage the contradiction between freedom of conscience, right to change beliefs and creed, and making everyone a citizen without asking for their consent first? So essentially, it seems like in a nutshell that, you know, whether you're born here or you moved here, or if you're like, say you're born here and you're born as a citizen here, you know, their philosophy states that you should have the freedom of conscience to choose your creedal belief or your values or whatever, but you're compelled to obey the laws without them asking you for consent.
Well, they do ask for your consent. You just don't realize it. It's called voting. So by voting, you give consent to the entire system itself every 4 or 5 years. And that's the point of it, is to get that continual consent. And people don't realize it. So I remember when Obama was the President Obama was encouraging people to participate in elections, and he said, "I don't care who you vote for, as long as you vote." Politicians are concerned with public engagement in the voting system of representative government, because if a significant majority of people don't vote, to the point that, let's say if most people don't vote, it puts a big, massive question mark on the legitimacy of the government and of the laws and the law enforcement and all this. So they, in essence, ask for your bay'ah every 4 to 5 years, your pledge of allegiance, in a way, every 4 to 5 years. And that's how they do it. And I know people often don't see it like that, but if you look at the Enlightenment philosophers and how they discussed how government should be affirmed, it's by regular voting. It's to justify and legitimize government. Because the previous idea was divine mandate, so that, you know, God chooses the leader and then you just obey the leader, right? So when they got rid of that, they need another mandate. The mandate must be the people. But how do you prevent tyranny? How do you prevent someone getting married, being elected once and then, you know, for life? They are a dictator for life, you know, in the Roman sense. Well, you have to have regular consent given. And of course, you can't have it every year. You can't have it every minute or second. So consent must be given once every 4 to 5 years as it's practical. And that's where you get that justification from. So that's why when people say, if you don't vote, you can't complain about how the politician acts. I'll say, if you do vote, you can't complain about. It's actually, if you do vote, you can't complain, because the politician represents you. Even if you vote for the other guy, you vote. You play a game where you accept the rules, and the rules are that you shall obey and you affirm the winner of this process. Right? That's what you're giving your vote to. So if you vote, you can't complain.
Okay. What about the sense that even if your vote didn't count, like it can be, elections in some countries, for example, are a facade. So it's like, I don't know, a certain dictator getting 99% of the vote. So even if would you say that holds true in the sense that perhaps this is just not even really meaningful, the voting in and of itself in some of these other countries and systems. You know what I mean? So you don't have the choice to agree with the system. You don't have the choice to disagree with the system. And you don't have the choice of, choosing another candidate, because it's either, the dictator or the dictator. Those are the two options on the ballot.
Yes, I think David Hume and John Stuart Mill both mentioned these are like British thinkers. David Hume was the founder of the Conservatives, the intellectual kind of founder of conservatism. Not exactly the founder, but let's say you could say a major founder. And John Stuart Mill obviously led to the kind of social liberalism, that the utilitarian understanding of social liberalism we have today. They both argued that the people who are elected, they're not elected to represent your interests. They are elected to think for you, right? So they're not here to do what you want. They've been elected by you to think on your behalf about what should be done for the society. So they're not here to do what you want, and they shouldn't be doing what you want. They should be thinking. This is how they argued it. They're only there to basically to think on your behalf. So they will think for you about what is your best interest, even if you don't agree that is your best interest. But they will think for you. So if they think that it's in your best interest, it's in the best interest of your children, that your children should not be taught to be Muslim and only embrace Islam or even hear about it at a later date or age, they could impose more secular curricula in schools. They could even impose secular curricula in Islamic schools and get rid of things they don't like in the interest of the child. And you might say, but I'm the parents, we're the parents of the child. We don't consent to that. And they say, well, so what? We think it's in the interest of your children that because we don't believe Islam is true, but we only allow religion to be chosen as a fashion choice, but only later on in life, that children should be raised according to what we deem to be a neutral worldview, which isn't actually neutral, it's liberal. But hey, if the child wants to obviously be a different gender than its sex, well then we let the child do whatever it wants in that regard. So if the child wants to remain a Muslim or wants to hear about Islamic education, then that we don't pay too much attention to. But if the child wants to be a different gender, we pay attention to that, right? That kind of inconsistency you see in the Western thought. But could we perhaps discuss a little bit on the issue of how debate is even carried out amongst Muslim community? Because I perhaps want to raise a few issues as well.
Ustadh, let's save that for our panel with all the speakers, because we have another session that we will have you, inshallah, where we'll have all the speakers. We are just out of time right now for our particular session. And of course, we're going to continue this conversation, inshallah, with hopefully another podcast episode dedicated to this, because I think one of the things that you've endeavored to do, and I hope our audience has appreciated that, is to start thinking independently and critically. And if we start doing that, and if we start questioning and we start thinking for ourselves, then we'll be less compelled to let people act for ourselves. We can act on our own. We don't need other people to act for us or always rely upon that. So JazakumAllahu Khairan for sharing your thoughts and your ideas. And yes, go ahead.
Could I just potentially just end on this final thought, sure. which is the fact that Muslims aren't having the right debate in terms of the topics that we are focusing on, but rather when we engage as Muslims who are living in the West on topics which are either adopting kind of left-wing discourses, or we talk about things which are general irrelevancies. I think it generally reflects, in terms of us adopting like left-wing arguments to defend ourselves, is that it's the same reason why how Muslims approach debate even amongst themselves. Is that it's about being effectual and having power, or trying to jostle or posture ourselves for our material interests, as opposed to kind of being servants and slaves of al-haq, the truth.
Yes, very good point.
Whereby if we were truly concerned with the truth, and we in a way eliminated the humans from the equation when we think about truth, and we try to explain the truth, taking humans out of the equation, because it is reality. No matter we all live in reality, and no matter whoever says anything different, then you'd get to see a better adab and better akhlaq amongst Muslims, and even in our debates with each other or our debates with other people, because it will be purely about trying to find the truth, but nothing to do with anyone's ego, as the vernacular word is. Truth is not connected to people's stature or status. Truth is truth, and so if we really, if we adopted that, we would be unafraid to explain in Western context as much as within our own discussions. We'd be unafraid to change our position or to represent confidently the truth of matter, with letting the evidences speak for themselves, and depending on our strength of argument alone, rather than on just trying to look a certain way, or trying to posture, or try to one up your opponent because you want to look like you're better than your opponent, because you're worried that if you don't denigrate them, they will have more influence than yourself. Whereas for us, it's not about the influence of people, but the influence of the truth that we need to focus on, and that is the right debate. It's the right thing that we should be focusing on in all our discourses.
Minkum man yurid ad-dunya wa minkum man yurid al-akhirah. There are those of you who desire this dunya, and there's those who desire the akhirah. And if you desire the akhirah, you're going to stand up for the truth. Some, I think, very important points to end off on. Ustadh, JazakumAllahu Khairan. We look forward to having you with our panel, with all our speakers from United Islam Awareness Week. And of course, we're going to keep, talking and discussing and getting people to think, inshallah, in future podcasts.
Do I feel that the New York police are providing enough protection, or do I have to have protection of my own? I look for protection from Allah.